We live in the era of the live service funeral. You know the script, you've seen it play out half a dozen times. A studio releases a bloated, over-monetized hero shooter trying to chase Overwatch money, and it flops on launch weekend because nobody asked for it. The developers issue a "We hear you" JPEG apology on Twitter. They promise a roadmap that didn't exist before said JPEG apology. And then, 6 months later, the servers go dark, the tax write-off is filed, and the game vanishes from history. It is one of the most predictable, cynical cycles in modern gaming. Splitgate was supposed to be the next in the grave. In June, Splitgate 2 launched with factions, abilities, and a desperate desire to be a modern shooter. It alienated the core fanbase who just wanted more Halo with portals, and it failed to attract the new blood that it was attempting to pander to. The player count flatlined, the Steam reviews hit mostly negative, and by all accounts this game should be dead. But then, 1047 Games did something unprecedented. They didn't just patch the damage values. They didn't just release a new map. They admitted that the entire foundational design of the sequel was a mistake. They took the servers offline. They deleted the factions. They scrapped the ultimate abilities. They unlaunched the game. And today, it returns as Arena Reloaded. This is the Admission of Guilt patch. It is a developer saying, "We were wrong, and you were right." But I don't care about their apology. I care about the executable file on my hard drive. Does deleting half of the features actually result in a better game? Or have they just stripped a bad game down to a bare-bones tech demo? I've spent an irresponsible amount of time since release auditing the new build, from the audio and video engines to the config files, to see if this is a redemption story or just a desperate pivot. Now, before we click a single head, we have to go to the options menu. This is the litmus test. If a competitive arena shooter doesn't respect my hardware in the menus, it likely won't respect my time in the match. And right away, Arena Reloaded shows promise, but with a few baffling omissions. First, input. Raw mouse input appears to be on by default. There's no hidden mouse acceleration or smoothing buried in a config file somewhere to make controller players feel better, at least not that I could find. When I move my mouse 3 centimeters, the crosshair moves that exact corresponding distance. This sounds like the bare minimum, sure, but in 2025, where a good chunk of the shooters on Steam force pointer precision on you, this is a win. Next, field of view. The slider goes up to 103 on all platforms. Is it the 120 FOV that Quake players want? No, frankly, I'd prefer a little bit more, and for a PC-centric arena shooter, capping at 103 feels a bit arbitrary. Maybe this is an attempt to reach some console PC parity because consoles tend to have less ass to push behind rendering things. And if you increase the FOV, you're going to decrease the frame rate. That said, the weapon view models at that 103 FOV actually scale correctly. You don't get that weird fisheye effect where the gun looks like it's 10 feet long, and that's nice. And crucially, there's dual keybinds. You can bind portal left to both Q and a mouse side button. In a game where APM is this high, that's actions per minute, having redundant binds is critical for high-level movement tech. They didn't simplify this menu for console parity. They kept the PC utility intact. But here's the first red flag. Under audio, there's no option to select your output device or force a specific mix. You're stuck with whatever Windows defaults to, unless you decide to install third-party EQ software. And for a competitive relaunch, missing basic audio routing is sloppy. But we'll get to the sound audit later. Now let's talk about the engine physics, because here's the truth about the unlaunch. Removing the hero abilities doesn't matter if the movement still feels like you're wading through molasses. The June build suffered from what I and many others characterize as input sludge. That gross sensation where you let go of the movement key but your character slides for another 200 milliseconds because the deceleration curve is too soft, tends to create a floaty feeling. It lowers the skill gap because you can't jiggle peek a corner as effectively. Now, I tested the strafe friction in Reloaded, and I have some good news. They tighten the screws. Yeah, it's not quite Counter-Strike instant stopping power, but the inertia is significantly reduced. When you want to stop, you stop. And this allows for actual strafe battles. You can react to incoming fire with movement, rather than just committing to a slide and praying. The jetpack momentum's also tweaked. In the hero version, the jetpack was kind of a get-out-of-jail-free card, had way too much fuel and refilled way too fast. Now, it's a precious resource. You have just enough fuel to bridge a gap or confuse an enemy, but not enough to hover above the map forever. It forces you to use the portals for traversal, rather than just flying over everything. And that is the correct design philosophy for a game that's trying to be Halo with portals. Then there's the gunplay. Yeah, I've seen the complaints on Reddit that the weapon bloom is random. Here's the reality. Yes, there is bloom. There aren't consistent weapon spray patterns, like no consistently up and to the left. So that does produce some problems. However, with them nuking visual recoil from orbit, your crosshair is going to be pulling in the direction that you need to actively counter. So yes, it increases the skill gap. And yes, it decreases overall consistency. But it is not oppressive. It is not Fortnite. The reticle reset speed is fast enough that if you pace your shots or have a little bit of patience, it is a laser. If you are losing gunfights in Reloaded, it is not because the game decided you missed. It's because some combination of your aim, your tracking, your positioning, or all three were off. Don't blame the engine for your poor discipline. However, while the bloom is fair, hit reg is generous. I noticed something weird during my testing. Take a look at this. My reticle is clearly off of the character model. I am aiming in the air above their head. And yet, if I was to fire right now, more often than not, the game will register a headshot. This is bullet magnetism. It's a classic Halo trick designed to make controller players feel like sharpshooters. But here's the catch. It's active on mouse and keyboard too. The game is effectively bending the bullet trajectory to ensure you hit, as long as you're close enough. Some people call this good game feel. Some others would call it training wheels. It artificially compresses this skill gap. You don't have to be pixel perfect, you just have to be pixel adjacent. It makes the game feel crisp, yes, but those triple dinks you just hit? Well, the engine did about 15% of that work for you. Physics are only half the equation for competitive play. The other half is information. And in an arena shooter, you need to be able to track through walls using sound. I tested the spatial sound implementation, and the results are mixed. Horizontal tracking is excellent. You can clearly hear if an enemy is flanking left or right, around corners, behind walls, etc. But vertical audio, the ability to tell if someone is above or below you, is pretty muddy, and that's even with the IEMs I specifically purchased for the clarity of that soundscape and audio positioning. And in a game with portals, where enemies constantly drop from the ceiling, or the floor, or that weird corner over there, this is a critical flaw. There were multiple instances while I was playing where I heard footsteps near me, but I couldn't distinguish if they were on the bridge above me, or in the pit below, or in some third Escher-esque space. However, the weapon's sound design has been overhauled. The kill chirp, that distinct, crispy sound when you eliminate a player, is incredibly satisfying. It's Pavlovian. But until they fix the vertical occlusion on footsteps, you are going to get plunked in the back by people you should have heard coming. But we can't give them a pass on the engine optimization. Arena Reloaded has moved to UE5, and the implementation is baffling at times. Usually when I hear the words competitive shooter and UE5 in the same sentence, unless there's a negative modifier in there somewhere about whether they're using it, I tend to reach for the aspirin. First, let's establish the baseline. I'm running this on a GeForce RTX 5090, paired with the Ryzen 7 7800X3D, 64 gigs of DDR5. At 4K native, with everything set to low, the engine is pushing a raw average of anywhere between 250 and 400 FPS. Now on paper that sounds fantastic, but average FPS is a vanity metric. It lies. The real story is in the 1% lows. Now, while my average is closer to that 350 plus mark, my 1% lows frequently dip into the 180s during Portal combat. And that is a massive delta. When you drop from 350 or 400 or even 300 down to 180 in a split second, your brain registers it as a hitch, even though the counter still says the game's running quite fast. When you track a target moving at Mach 2 through a portal or 3, you can feel that inconsistency. It makes the mouse tracking feel just slightly sandy rather than glassy. And in a movement-based competitive arena FPS, well, that won't fly. Now, I audited the upscaling tech here. Upscaler haters are going to be quite pleased. Both DLSS and FSR3. Usually this is the free FPS button. But on my machine, enabling DLSS actually cost me between 30 to 60 frames. Yeah, you heard that right. Turning on the performance feature made the performance worse. My advice, run it native, turn the upscalers off. They're broken right now. Also, don't bother trying to fix the lighting yourself. In UE5 games, Global Illumination via Lumen generally tends to add quite a bit of input latency. So, after seeing it wasn't in the menus, I dug into the config files to find and manually disable it. I found the variable SG Global Illumination quality. Set it to 0. I set it to 3. I set it to everything in between. I set it to read only. Nothing happened. The frame rate didn't budge outside of what could be considered within the realm of error statistically. The lighting didn't change. The game ignores its own configuration files. This is the very definition of a locked garden. You cannot optimize this game. You are forced to play with their lighting, their shadows, and their latency overhead. So if you're struggling with FPS, on PC at least, there is no magic fix. You just have to lower the resolution, move all the sliders to low, and pray. So let's zoom out for a second and look at the playgrounds. When they unlaunched the game, they also tweaked the map rotation, and the philosophy has shifted a bit. Classic Splitgate uses Swiss cheese design of sorts, porous maps where walls are opportunities, not barriers. But the new maps, like Frontier, feel strangely flat. They've moved closer to a traditional 3-lane structure. The sightlines are cleaner, yes, but it feels like they're almost trying to Call of Duty-fy the flow to make it less chaotic for new players. Now, for veterans and people more readily able to engage in the movement mechanics here, this feels a bit restrictive. The genius of Splitgate was the verticality. Flattening the maps to make them safe removes the specific flavor that made the game unique. And, in my opinion, some maps still feel a bit too large for the new movement speed. Without the sprint abilities of the factions, traversing the older, larger maps feels a bit like a hike. You find yourself spamming portals just to commute to the fight, not to actually fight. Right now, the pacing on large maps feels a little bit lethargic. Whether they remedy this by increasing the base movement speed or potentially adding additional portal opportunity walls, we'll see. Now let's talk about the ecosystem. The physics are fixed, and the engine's manageable. But who are you actually shooting? Splitgate has a massive problem, and it's called the Ghost Town. The unlaunch wiped the player base. They are rebuilding from 0. In my testing, anywhere between 20 to 30% of my casual lobbies, read as not the ranked playlist, failed to fill entirely with human players. Instead of making you wait, the game quietly backfills the lobby with bots. So if you see a player named Dave or Oyster Sauce walking into a wall, that is code. To be clear, ranked play seems safe. In ranked, I waited several minutes for a match, but I did actually get 8 real, presumably, humans. But in casual, I can become a bit of a bot farm depending upon your region and what time of day you play. And really, killing a bot feels a little bit like hollow calories, ruins the tension. If the unlaunch doesn't bring back a massive wave of real humans, the casual experience is rapidly going to feel like a graveyard or a rotation of custom games that you could set up yourself. And on the flip side, when you do find humans, you're either finding people brand new to the game, or you're finding the vets. These are the people who never stopped playing Splitgate 1. They have 4,000 hours. They know portal routes that defy physics and reason and rationality. Now, without a massive influx of new casual players, the skill floor in this game is terrifying. You're either killing Dave the bot, or getting spawn camped by a guy who hasn't touched grass since 2019. There is little middle ground right now. Now, I'm personally willing to suffer through my own skill issue until I improve. Many won't. And for a game with such a checkered history and a very tenuous relaunch, that's risky. Finally, let's look at wallet damage. The game is free to play. I can respect that. It does make my math on the burrito index very easy. Because realistically, I can get some dopamine from this game for $0. I can't get dopamine from a burrito for $0. I also do have to give them credit for Prolium. Unlike Overwatch 2, where you earn 60 cents a week or whatnot, Splitgate introduced a dedicated grind currency that actually lets you unlock cosmetics just by playing. The catch here is that there is a weekly cap. You cannot just grind 24/7 to unlock the store. They do still want you to pay. But the path exists for free players, and that matters, especially in today's landscape. But my biggest surprise with this whole thing, the monetization model and the debacle that's been going on since Gamescom, was the shocking amount of integrity shown. In almost every sequel or rebrand I have covered or seen or played or suffered through, the studio uses the new engine as an excuse to wipe your inventory. Splitgate didn't do that. They honored the purchases. Deleted items were refunded, compatible items were ported. This is a logistical nightmare for developers. But they did it anyway. However, if you do want to skip the grind and open your wallet, a single armor set costs 2,000 split coins. That is $20 US for a skin. One skin. The free path is fair, and the refunds were generous, but the premium pricing here is still aiming for whale territory. Now, it's not predatory, but it certainly isn't cheap. So we arrive at the verdict. Is Splitgate Arena Reloaded a redemption story? Technically, yes, absolutely. It runs better, plays cleaner, and respects the sanctity of arena shooter mechanics far more than the bloated mess we got in June. They identified the problem, hero shooter creep, and they cut it out. That takes guts. Thankfully, also the BR is gone. Unfortunately, it's going to be coming back later, but hey, whatever. Structurally, it's a massive gamble. They're betting that in 2025, and about to be 2026, people still want a pure, sweaty arena shooter with no gimmicks. They're betting that you don't need to have monetization crammed in everywhere for cosmetics to have fun. They're betting that gameplay is king. I'm stoked about that. Now, my recommendation here, download it. It's not huge, it's free. And if you missed the days of Halo 3 on Xbox 360, or possibly weren't alive for those, if you're tired of Call of Dutying itself, or Overwatch drowning in visual noise, this might be the cleansing fire you need. The movement is crisp. The portals are mind-bending. The gunplay is honest. Just do yourself a favor. Check the kill feed. If you snipe a guy named Dave, don't celebrate too hard. That chunk of code is doing its very best. I've been BaldSquid. I'll see you next time.